Welcome. If you enjoy these stories, please like, share and subscribe. For a bit of fun, comment where you're from and what time you're watching this video. Now lie back, relax and let sleep consume you. The fun fair buzzed with energy, a cacophony of laughter, music and the enticing aroma of fried food. Our group, eager for some light-hearted thrills, decided to tackle the main attraction, the country's largest mirror maze, a labyrinthine structure promising utter disorientation. We entered the maze together, the initial moments filled with playful shouts and the disorienting effect of endless reflections. Each turn presented a multitude of possible paths, the mirrored walls creating an illusion of vastness where only narrow corridors existed. It happened quickly, a momentary lapse in attention, a wrong turn down what appeared to be a clear passage. When I looked back, my friends were gone, swallowed by the maze of reflections. I called out, my voice muffled by the mirrored surfaces, receiving no response. I tried to retrace my steps, but every turn looked the same, each reflection mocking my attempts to find my way back. The initial amusement morphed into a growing frustration, then a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. I was lost. Then a flash of color in the back of the reflections, a figure that didn't belong. A clown. His painted face, with its wide, exaggerated smile and dark, vacant eyes, appeared in the mirror behind me. I turned quickly, but there was only my own reflection staring back. I turned back to the mirrors, scanning the endless corridors of reflected images. There he was, again. Further back this time, his painted smile fixed in a disturbing grin. He didn't move, simply stood there, observing me from the depths of the reflections. A cold shiver ran down my spine. This was not part of the fun. This was something else. I started to move, trying to put distance between myself and the unsettling image in the mirror. As I navigated the maze, the clown's reflection reappeared, always behind me, always watching. He began to mimic my actions, tilting his head when I did, raising a hand when I touched a mirrored wall. His movements were slightly delayed, off-kilter, adding to the growing sense of unease. Then his behavior shifted. The playful mimicry was replaced by something more sinister. His painted smile seemed to widen, becoming almost predatory. His dark eyes followed my every step with an unnerving intensity. He started to move through the reflections, appearing in different mirrors, always closer. It was as if he was gliding through the mirrored corridors, his movements fluid and silent. I began to hurry, my heart pounding in my chest. The maze, once a source of amusement, now felt like a terrifying trap. The clown's reflection was gaining on me, his painted face a constant presence in my peripheral vision. I turned a corner hoping to lose him in the labyrinth of reflections, but there he was, in the mirror directly ahead, his image distorted by the angled surface, his smile stretched into a grotesque leer. He started to chase me through the reflections, his image appearing and disappearing in the mirrors, always a step behind, always drawing nearer. The funfair sounds outside the maze faded into a muffled background noise, replaced by the frantic pounding of my own heart and the chilling awareness of the unseen pursuer in the mirrored world behind me. I stumbled through the maze, my hands outstretched, trying to find a way out, each turn leading to more reflections, more dead ends. The clown's image was now just inches behind my reflection in the mirrors, his painted face a terrifying mask of pursuit. I could almost feel his presence, a cold, unseen breath on the back of my neck. The reflections seemed to multiply, the corridors stretching into infinity, the clown's image appearing in every mirror surrounding me, closing in. The last reflection I saw before I turned another corner showed him reaching out his painted smile inches from my own reflected face. The way ahead remained a confusing jumble of glass and endless corridors. The laughter and bright lights of the travelling carnival had held such innocent joy just weeks ago. My son, his small hand tightly gripping mine, had been mesmerized by the whirling rides and the promise of sugary treats. Then, in a fleeting moment of distraction, he was gone. The frantic search began instantly, a desperate scramble through the throngs of people, the cheerful music now a mocking soundtrack to my rising panic. Hours passed in a blur of frantic calls and fruitless inquiries. He was simply gone, vanished without a trace from the crowded midway. Days turned into weeks, the agonizing silence amplifying the emptiness in our home. Amidst the official investigation and the well-meaning condolences, whispers began to circulate, hushed accounts of a particular clown seen at the carnival that day. A clown with no name, it seemed, who appeared briefly at various events only to vanish as quickly as he arrived. A seed of suspicion took root, growing into an unshakable conviction. This clown, this fleeting figure no one could quite describe, held the key to my son's disappearance. I began my own search, poring over online forums, contacting other families who had experienced similar tragedies at traveling carnivals. A pattern emerged, a chilling connection to a clown who fit the same description, appearing without fanfare, entertaining the children and then disappearing, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and missing children in his wake. No one could recall his face. The details were always hazy, a vague impression of painted smiles and brightly colored hair, but nothing concrete. My journey began, a solitary pursuit across state lines, following the whispers and rumors of the nameless clown. I visited countless carnivals, each one a painful reminder of what I had lost. I spoke to ride operators, game attendants, other performers, showing them a picture of my son, always asking about the clown. The responses were always the same, a vague recollection, a feeling of something not quite right, and the frustrating inability to recall any specific details about his appearance. It was as if a collective amnesia surrounded this particular performer. At one carnival in a small forgotten town, a woman, her eyes filled with a sorrow I recognized instantly, told me about her daughter who had vanished years ago. She remembered the clown, a feeling of coldness that emanated from him even amidst the festive atmosphere. She couldn't describe his face, but the feeling, the dread, remained vivid. At another stop, a retired carny, his face etched with years of travel and untold stories, spoke of a legend, a tale whispered among the performers. A clown who wasn't quite human. A figure who moved between carnivals like a phantom drawn to the innocence of children. He dismissed it as folklore, a way to spook the newcomers, but his eyes held a flicker of something more. A hint of belief in the unbelievable. With each passing carnival, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, forming a terrifying picture. This was not just a man in makeup, this was something else, something that defied explanation, something that preyed on the joy and chaos of the traveling shows. I started to experience strange occurrences myself, a fleeting glimpse of a brightly colored figure at the edge of the crowd, only to vanish when I looked again. A child's laughter that seemed to echo from nowhere, a sense of being watched even in the midst of the bustling crowds. My pursuit became an obsession, the need to uncover the truth driving me forward, pushing me through exhaustion and despair. I felt him, the clown, a presence just out of reach, a shadow flitting between the bright lights and the swirling crowds. Then, at a small rundown carnival on the outskirts of a nameless town, I saw him clearly for the first time. He was standing near the carousel, his painted smile wide, his eyes empty. There was something profoundly unsettling about his gaze, a lack of warmth, a void that seemed to swallow the light around him. As I tried to move closer, the crowd shifted and he was gone. I searched frantically, my heart pounding in my chest, but he had vanished into the throng of people. Yet, in that brief moment, something about his form, the way he moved, the feeling that emanated from him resonated with a primal fear I couldn't explain. I remain on the road, following the whispers, the fleeting glimpses, the trail of vanished children. The nameless clown continues to appear, a harbinger of sorrow at every carnival he visits. I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that our paths will cross again, and when they do, I will finally see what lies beneath the painted smile, even if it's the last thing I ever see. The fair was a vibrant tapestry of sights and sounds, a welcome escape from the mundane routine of everyday life. I wandered through the crowds, enjoying the festive atmosphere, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy filling the air. Then standing near a game booth, a clown. He wasn't interacting with anyone, not performing any tricks, not even smiling in the exaggerated way clowns usually do. He was simply standing there, his painted face turned towards me, his eyes fixed on mine. I glanced away, a little unnerved, and continued walking. But the feeling of being observed persisted. I glanced back. He was still there, his gaze unwavering, following mine. He hadn't moved from his spot near the game booth, yet his attention felt like a tangible connection. As I moved through the fair, browsed the craft stalls and watching the various performances, I noticed him again and again. He was always at a distance, never, but always there, his painted face a silent sentinel in the bustling crowd. He never spoke, never gestured, never interacted with anyone else. His sole focus seemed to be me. A knot of discomfort began to tighten in my stomach. This was beyond the usual carnival antics. This felt personal, unsettling. I decided to report it to the security personnel patrolling the grounds. I approached a uniformed guard, trying to explain the situation. The clown, who was simply staring, following me through the crowd. He listened patiently, his expression polite but skeptical. He agreed to walk with me back to the areas where I had seen the clown. We searched the midway, scanning the faces in the crowd, but there was no sign of him. The guard suggested he had likely moved on, perhaps gone on break. I felt a wave of frustration and a growing sense of isolation. No one else seemed to have noticed him, this silent, persistent observer. The feeling of being watched intensified as the day wore on. Even though I couldn't always see him, I could sense his presence, a prickle on the back of my neck, a feeling of eyes on me. The joy of the fair had completely evaporated, replaced by a gnawing unease. I decided to leave. The festive atmosphere now felt menacing, the crowds claustrophobic. I hurried towards the exit, constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the painted face in the throng of people. The walk home felt longer than usual, the familiar streets seeming darker, more isolated. The feeling of being followed persisted, a silent presence just out of sight. I quickened my pace, a desperate urge to reach the safety of my own home. I locked the door behind me, the familiar click of the bolt offering a small measure of comfort. I checked the windows, drawing the curtains, trying to shut out the lingering sense of being watched. Exhausted and unnerved, I went to bed, hoping for a restful sleep to dispel the unsettling events of the day. The next morning, the sunlight streaming through my window woke me. As I stretched and reached for my phone on the nightstand, my gaze fell upon the bedroom door. Something was different. Tied to the doorknob, swaying gently in the morning breeze that drifted through the slightly open window, was a balloon. A brightly coloured balloon, the kind clowns often hand out at fairs. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the silent, bobbing balloon, the unsettling image of the painted face from the day before flashing through my mind. The funfair buzzed with a chaotic energy, a swirl of bright colours and enticing sounds that captivated our child. His small hand slipped from mine for just a moment, drawn, I later realised, by a figure standing near the edge of the crowd. A clown. This one was different, silent, his painted smile fixed, offering colourful balloons to the children who approached. The initial panic was a cold fist clenching in my chest. A frantic search ensued, my partner and I calling his name, our voices lost in the din of the carnival. Minutes stretched into an eternity before we found him. He was standing near the perimeter fence, the silent clown still there, a small, brightly coloured balloon clutched tightly in his hand. Relief washed over us, so potent it almost buckled my knees. We rushed to him, but his demeanour had shifted. The vibrant excitement that had filled him all day was gone, replaced by a stillness that was deeply unsettling. His eyes stared blankly ahead, unfocused, as if he were looking at something we couldn't see. He didn't respond to our calls, his small hand gripping the balloon with an almost painful intensity. We brought him home, the silence in the car amplifying his strange quietness. He went to bed without a word, still clutching the balloon. Later that night, I checked on him. The door to his room was slightly ajar and a faint sound drifted out. He was speaking. I pushed the door open further, peering into the dimly lit room. He was sitting up in bed, facing the corner, his small voice murmuring. There was no one else there. I strained to hear what he was saying. He spoke of the clown, the one from the funfair. He said the clown wanted him to join, to be a new clown. The words were innocent, childlike, yet they sent a shiver of unease down my spine. We exchanged worried glances the next morning, dismissing the nighttime conversation as a lingering effect of the excitement and a vivid imagination. We tried to talk to him about the clown, about his day at the funfair, but he remained withdrawn, his gaze distant, the balloon still his constant companion. I went to wake him the following morning, the familiar routine feeling heavy with unspoken anxiety. The door to his room was closed. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was empty. His bed was neatly made, his favourite toys arranged on the shelf. There was no sign of him. Then I noticed near the ceiling, gently bumping against the light fixture, floated a single brightly coloured balloon, the same balloon he had been holding the day before. The carnival buzzed with a joyful energy, a kaleidoscope of lights and sounds that filled the late afternoon air. My son, his face alight with excitement, tugged at my hand, eager to experience every thrill the fair had to offer. His eyes landed on an antique carousel, its painted horses gleaming under the carnival lights, their glass eyes seeming to sparkle with a life of their own. He begged for a ride, his small voice filled with an irresistible enthusiasm. I smiled, helping him onto one of the intricately carved wooden horses, its painted saddle worn smooth by countless rides. He beamed, clutching the pole tightly as the carousel began its rotation, the nostalgic melody of the calliope filling the air. I stood by the railing, watching him circle around, his laughter echoing above the music. The other children on the ride waved and smiled, their faces reflecting the simple joy of the moment. The carousel spun round and round, a timeless spectacle of childhood delight. Then the music began to wind down, the carousel gradually losing its momentum until it came to a complete stop. The children started to dismount, their parents reaching out to take their hands. I watched, waiting for my son to step off his horse. One by one, the other children were helped down, their laughter and chatter filling the air. But my son remained on his horse, his small figure still and silent. A knot of unease began to tighten in my chest. I moved closer to the carousel, my gaze fixed on his unmoving form. The other parents and children dispersed, their attention already drawn to the next attraction. The ride operator, a man with a disturbingly wide smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, stood by the controls. I approached him, a growing sense of panic welling up inside me. He simply watched me, his smile never faltering. I looked back at the carousel, at the empty space where my son should have been. He was gone. My breath caught in my throat, a silent scream building within me. The other children had dismounted. Where was he? I looked back at the operator, his smile still fixed, his eyes holding a strange, knowing glint. He gestured towards the carousel with a gloved hand, his smile widening further. His lips moved, forming words I somehow understood without them being spoken aloud, a chilling explanation that resonated with a horrifying certainty. The carousel, he seemed to convey, always takes what it needs. Before I could react, before I could even fully grasp the enormity of his words, the carousel began to move again. The calliope started its familiar tune, and a new set of children, their faces bright with anticipation, climbed onto the wooden horses. The ride began its endless cycle, the painted horses rising and falling, carrying their oblivious passengers around and around, while the truth of the operator's words echoed in the sudden emptiness beside me. The arrival of the traveling circus had filled our child with an infectious joy. He chattered endlessly about the acrobats and the elephants, but it was the clowns who truly captured his imagination. For days after our visit, he would mimic their antics, his laughter echoing through the house. Then he began to speak of a new friend, a clown. This clown, however, was different from the ones at the circus. This clown only appeared at night, standing at the edge of our backyard, just beyond the patio lights. We smiled, attributing it to the lingering magic of the circus, a vivid creation of a young mind. We listened patiently as he described the clown's tall, thin frame and the painted smile that never seemed to change. He never mentioned the clown speaking, just standing there silently. As the nights passed, his descriptions became more detailed. The clown wore a suit of vibrant colors, he said, and sometimes held balloons that seemed to glow in the dark. He would stand perfectly still just at the edge of the darkness, his painted grin always directed towards our house, towards our child's bedroom window. A subtle disquiet began to settle over us. While we still believed it was just his imagination running wild, the consistency of his descriptions and the specific details he provided were unsettling. We started checking the backyard before bed, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, but we never found anything. He would sometimes wave to the empty space beyond the patio lights, a small, innocent gesture directed at his silent nighttime friend. He never seemed scared, only fascinated, as if this nightly visitor was a comforting presence. One evening he mentioned that the clown had started pointing towards his window, a silent invitation, he seemed to imply. This detail sent a shiver of unease through me. We began checking on him more frequently during the night, slipping into his room to make sure he was still sound asleep. One night I woke suddenly, a feeling of profound unease pulling me from my sleep. I didn't know what had prompted it, just a sense that Something was not right. I got out of bed and walked to the window, drawn by an irresistible pull. I peered out into the darkness of the backyard. The patio lights cast a pale glow on the lawn, illuminating the familiar shapes of the trees and the garden shed, and then I saw it. Standing at the very edge of the yard, just beyond the reach of the light, was a figure, tall and gaunt, its silhouette stark against the dark backdrop of the woods. It was facing our house, its form perfectly still. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out more details. The figure wore something brightly colored, a suit that seemed to shimmer faintly in the moonlight, and then I saw the face, even from this distance. The painted grin was unmistakable, a wide, fixed expression that seemed to stretch across its face. Its eyes, dark and vacant, were directed upwards towards the window of our child's bedroom. The figure stood there, silent, its painted smile a chilling promise in the darkness. The roar of the crowd, the smell of sawdust and popcorn, it was everything I had ever dreamed of. Joining the Grand Vaudeville Circus, a troupe renowned for its breathtaking performances and legendary status, felt like the culmination of years of relentless training. I was young, eager, and ready to soar. My initial weeks were a whirlwind of rehearsals, costume fittings, and getting to know the other performers. Each one was a master of their craft, their skills honed to perfection. But beneath the glittering smiles and dazzling costumes, I sensed a shared sorrow, a quiet melancholy that seemed to permeate the very air backstage. As I spent more time with them, fragments of their past began to surface, stories shared in hushed tones during breaks or late-night gatherings in the dimly lit tents. The strongman spoke of a terrible accident that had crushed his family, leaving him with nothing but his immense physical power. The contortionist recounted a devastating illness that had twisted her body into seemingly impossible shapes. The clown, his painted smile never quite reaching his eyes, mumbled about a personal tragedy that had shattered his ability to feel joy. Each story was more tragic than the last, each performer seemingly bound to the circus by a thread of profound loss and horror. I tried to offer words of comfort, to find some glimmer of hope in their tales, but their eyes held a distant, haunted look that suggested their pain was far beyond solace. Then the visions began, fleeting like half-forgotten dreams intruding into my waking hours. I would be practicing my aerial silks high above the sawdust ring, and suddenly see a flash of the strong man, not as he was now, but trapped beneath a collapsed beam, his face contorted in agony. The vision would vanish as quickly as it appeared, leaving me disoriented and shaken. The hallucinations grew more vivid, more persistent. During the contortionist practice, I would see her younger self, frail and weakened, her limbs twisting in agony from the unseen disease. The clown's painted smile would dissolve into a mask of utter despair, his laughter replaced by silent tears streaming down a grief-stricken face. I started to question my own sanity, attributing the visions to stress and exhaustion. But the images felt too real, too visceral, as if I were witnessing these events firsthand. I noticed inconsistencies in the performers' stories, details that didn't quite align with the horrifying scenes that flashed before my eyes. The strong man had spoken of a construction accident, but my visions showed a deliberate act, a desperate sacrifice to save someone else. The contortionist claimed her illness had been random, but I saw a dark ritual, a willing exchange of her physical form for a place within the circus. The clown's tragedy, he had implied, was a personal failing, but I witnessed a pact made in desperation, a soul traded for an audience's fleeting amusement. A chilling realization began to dawn upon me. These were not accidents, these were not mere tragedies, they were sacrifices. Each performer had paid a terrible price to join the Grand Vaudeville Circus, their past horrors not random misfortunes, offerings made to something that sustained the circus, something that demanded a constant stream of sorrow and despair. The vibrant energy of the circus, the captivating performances, the legendary status, it all felt different now, tainted by the horrifying truth I was beginning to uncover. The roar of the crowd no longer sounded like applause, but like a hungry entity being fed. The glittering costumes seemed to shimmer with a dark energy, and the painted smiles of the performers now appeared as masks concealing unimaginable pain. As I continued my training, I began to feel a subtle pressure, an unspoken expectation that Ringmaster, a figure who had initially seemed charismatic and welcoming, now regarded me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. His smile held a knowing quality. His eyes seemed to peer into my very soul. One evening, as I practiced my high-wire act, a new vision flooded my mind. It was me, years ago, standing at a crossroads, facing a terrible choice. A voice, smooth and persuasive, offered me fame, adoration, a life among the stars of the grand vaudeville circus. The price, the voice whispered, was a small sacrifice, a fleeting moment of pain for an eternity of glory. The vision faded, leaving me trembling on the wire, the ground a dizzying distance below. The chilling understanding settled upon me. My own story was yet to be written, my own sacrifice yet to be made. The circus had a place for me, a role to play in its dark, unending spectacle. The roar of the unseen crowd seemed to call my name. The fair was a kaleidoscope of vibrant colors and joyous sounds, a perfect afternoon outing with my daughter. We wandered through the throngs of people, hand in hand, her laughter echoing as she pointed at the various attractions. Then, in a fleeting moment near the crowded carousel, she was gone. Panic seized me, a cold grip in my chest. I scanned the swirling mass of people, calling her name, my voice barely audible above the music and chatter. After what felt like an eternity of frantic searching, I spotted her near the edge of the fairgrounds in a section I didn't recognize. This part of the fair was different. The tents looked older, their canvas faded and worn. The rides were still, their metal frames coated in rust. And then there were the clowns. Unlike the boisterous, laughing clowns in the main area, these figures stood perfectly still, their painted smiles fixed in vacant expressions. Their eyes, however, followed us as we approached. Relief at finding her quickly morphed into a growing sense of unease. This area felt wrong, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of the main fair, amplifying the stillness of the clowns. I took my daughter's hand, eager to leave this unsettling place. As we turned to walk away, the clowns began to follow. They moved with a silent, gliding motion, their painted eyes never leaving us. They maintained a consistent distance, never falling behind. Their presence a constant, unnerving weight on our backs. We quickened our pace, hoping to outwalk them, to return to the familiar crowds and bright lights. But the clowns matched our speed effortlessly, their silent pursuit relentless. They began to gesture towards my daughter, their painted hands outstretched, their vacant smiles seeming to widen. Their silent actions conveyed a disturbing message, a silent claim. A cold dread washed over me. Their gestures, their stillness, their unwavering gaze, it all pointed to something deeply disturbing. They seemed to recognize her, to believe she belonged here among them. I pulled my daughter closer, my heart pounding in my chest. We walked faster, almost running, desperate to escape the silent, pursuing figures, but they remained, their numbers seeming to grow as more clowns emerged from the dilapidated tents and rusting rides. They surrounded us now, a silent circle of painted faces, their vacant eyes fixed on my daughter. Their outstretched hands reached towards her, their silent claim echoing in the stillness of this forgotten corner of the fair. I held her tightly, shielding her from their reach, the chilling realization dawning upon me that they were not going to let us leave. His world narrowed to the flashing lights and booming music the moment the circus arrived in town. From the posters plastered on every lamppost to the vibrant banners flapping in the breeze, everything about the grand majestic circus held an irresistible allure for him. He spoke of little else, his eyes wide with wonder as he described the acrobats, the clowns, and the magnificent ringmaster in his top hat and tails. The day of the show, his excitement was almost unbearable. He sat on the edge of his seat, captivated by every act, his laughter echoing through the tent. During the intermission, his fascination drew him backstage, a forbidden world of painted faces, glittering costumes, and strange props. The initial panic set in as the final act concluded and he wasn't in his seat. A frantic search of the tent yielded nothing. We alerted the circus staff, their initial reassurances quickly turning to concerned inquiries as the minutes stretched into an hour with no sign of him. Local authorities were notified, a wider search commencing around the fairgrounds and the surrounding town. Days blurred into a desperate cycle of hope and despair, every poster, every fleeting glimpse of red and white, a painful reminder of what we had lost. As the official investigation yielded no results, our own search intensified. We spoke to everyone connected with the circus, the roustabouts, the performers, the ticket sellers, each interaction adding another layer of unanswered questions. A chance remark from a long-time resident, a hushed anecdote about other children who had gone missing in towns the circus had visited years ago, sparked a new, chilling direction in our search. We began to delve into the circus's history, poring over old newspaper archives and online forums dedicated to unsolved disappearances. A pattern emerged, a disturbing thread connecting the Grand Majestic Circus to a series of missing children in various towns across the country, spanning decades. The details were always vague, dismissed as runaways or accidents, but the coincidences were too numerous to ignore. Our focus narrowed to the ringmaster, the charismatic face of the Grand Majestic. He had been with the circus for as long as anyone could remember, a constant presence amidst the ever-changing roster of performers. We sought out old photographs, newspaper interviews, any glimpse into the man behind the captivating smile. What we found was unsettling. A collection of faded photographs showed the ringmaster with different groups of children over the years, his arm always around a young shoulder, his smile unchanging, but in their eyes we saw a flicker of something that chilled us to the bone, a look of emptiness, of something taken. We discovered old circus programs, their pages brittle with age, listing acts that no longer existed, acts featuring children who had seemingly vanished without a trace. The names were different, the towns varied, but the pattern remained the same. Driven by a desperate need for answers, we managed to gain access to the ringmaster's private trailer, a lavishly decorated space that felt strangely detached from the rough-and-tumble world of the traveling circus. Inside, hidden beneath a false bottom in a trunk, we found them. Drawings, hundreds of them. Crude, disturbing depictions of children in various states of distress, surrounded by figures that resembled the circus performers, but with twisted, nightmarish features. There were sketches of elaborate cages, of strange rituals, of things that defied explanation and sent a wave of nausea through us. Along with the drawings, we found a ledger, its pages filled with names and dates, many of which corresponded with the disappearances we had uncovered in our research. Beside each name was a single cryptic symbol, repeated again and again. The evidence painted a horrifying picture, far beyond anything we could have imagined. The ringmaster wasn't just running a circus, he was collecting children for some purpose too sinister to comprehend. The performances were a facade, a way to lure unsuspecting families, to find new additions to his collection. The chilling realization washed over us. Our son hadn't just wandered off. He had become part of something much larger, much darker, a terrifying secret hidden beneath the glittering spectacle of the Grand Majestic Circus. The ledger, the drawings, the history of disappearances, they all pointed to a horrifying truth, a fate for our son more terrifying than we could ever have imagined. The circus had packed up and moved on to the next town. We were left with the evidence, the chilling, unanswered questions, and the horrifying certainty of what the Grand Majestic Circus truly was. The fair had brought a burst of fleeting colour to our small town, the sounds of laughter and music carrying on the evening air. I often watched the children walking home, their faces flushed with excitement, clutching small prizes. One boy in particular always caught my eye, his bright red jacket a stark contrast against the twilight. One evening, as he walked past my window, I noticed something unusual at the edge of the woods that lined the street. A figure stood amongst the trees, half hidden behind the branches. It was a clown, its painted face a stark white in the fading light, its colourful costume a jarring sight against the muted greens and browns of the forest. It raised a gloved hand and waved towards the boy. The next day, as the boy walked home, the clown was closer. It stood at the very edge of the tree line, no longer concealed by the branches. Its painted grin seemed wider, more pronounced in the daylight. It remained perfectly still as the boy passed, its eyes dark circles against the white face, fixed on him. Each evening that followed, the clown was nearer to the boy's path. It progressed slowly, methodically, moving from the tree line to the edge of the sidewalk, then a few feet onto the grass. Its painted grin never faltered, its silent presence a constant, unsettling fixture on the boy's walk home. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. I tried to point it out to a neighbour, mentioning the strange clown that had been appearing near the woods. They looked in the direction I indicated, their brow furrowed in confusion. They saw nothing, just the trees and the empty sidewalk. The boy, initially seemingly oblivious, began to notice. His steps grew quicker as he approached the spot where the clown stood. He would glance towards it, his small face etched with a growing fear. Yet he never stopped, never acknowledged the silent figure with the unchanging grin. The clown continued its advance night after night. It was now standing directly on the sidewalk, its tall, gaunt frame looming over the boy as he passed. Its painted eyes seemed to follow him, its silent presence a tangible. One evening, as dusk began to settle, I waited by my window for the familiar flash of the red jacket. The usual sounds of children playing in the distance gradually faded. The streetlights flickered on, their pale glow illuminating the empty sidewalk. The boy never came home that night. The next morning, the red jacket was absent from the usual stream of children walking to school. The clown was gone too. The tree line stood silent, the sidewalk empty, the mystery of the silent figure and the missing boy hanging heavy in the quiet air. The circus was a spectacle of dazzling lights and thrilling feats. The air crackled with energy, the roar of the crowd a constant backdrop to the acrobats' daring swings and the ringmaster's booming voice. I clutched my stuffed rabbit tightly, its familiar softness a comfort amidst the excitement. During one of the acts, a particularly daring high-wire performance, my rabbit slipped from my grasp and tumbled beneath the bleachers. A small gasp escaped my lips as I watched it disappear into the dimly lit space below. Determined to retrieve my beloved toy, I carefully crawled under the wooden seats. The space beneath the bleachers was dark and dusty, the air still and smelling faintly of popcorn and something else, something musty and unfamiliar. As my fingers brushed against the soft fur of my rabbit, I noticed a figure huddled in the shadows at the far end, a clown. His painted face, illuminated by the faint light filtering through the gaps in the bleachers, was fixed on me. His smile was wide and painted, but his eyes held a stillness that was deeply unsettling. He didn't move, simply sat there, his gaze fixed on me as I reached for my rabbit. A prickle of fear ran down my spine. This clown was different from the jovial performers in the ring. There was something about his silent, his intense stare that made me want to back away as I began to crawl backwards, clutching my rabbit tightly. The clown's lips moved. A whisper, soft yet distinct, reached my ears, carrying my name. My own name, spoken by this strange, silent figure in the darkness beneath the bleachers. I scrambled out from under the bleachers as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to explain what I had seen, the clown, the whisper, but my words tumbled out in a rush, fueled by a fear that no one seemed to understand. My parents smiled reassuringly, attributing my fright to an overactive imagination, the excitement of the circus playing tricks on my mind. The other families around us chuckled, their attention already back on the spectacle in the ring. No one believed me. The following days, the news carried stories. Children who had attended the circus were missing, one, then two, then more. Their disappearances were sudden, unexplained, leaving behind only distraught families and unanswered questions. A cold dread began to settle over me. The memory of the clown under the bleachers, his silent stare, his whispered words, it all came flooding back. The fear I had felt that day intensified, a chilling certainty that what I had seen was real and somehow connected to the missing children. I tried to tell my parents again, my voice trembling, but the news reports only fueled their dismissal. It was a coincidence, they said, a terrible tragedy, but nothing to do with a child's imagination running wild at the circus. Yet I knew what I had seen in the darkness beneath the bleachers. The clown, his silent, his whispered name. The connection was undeniable in my mind, a terrifying link between my encounter and the growing list of missing children. The circus had moved on to another town, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and unanswered questions. But the memory of the clown, his painted smile and vacant eyes remained, a constant chilling reminder of what lurks beneath the surface of the spectacle. The woods swallowed us whole as we ventured off the beaten path, our laughter echoing through the trees. We were seeking something different, a thrill beyond the usual weekend hangouts. Legend had it that deep within these woods lay an abandoned carnival, forgotten and overgrown. After what felt like hours of pushing through dense undergrowth, we found it. The skeletal remains of rides pierced the canopy, their rusted metal groaning in the breeze. Peeling paint adorned the faded facades of game booths, and the air hung heavy with the scent of decay and damp earth. We moved through the deserted grounds, a strange mix of excitement and apprehension filling us. The Ferris wheel stood frozen mid-turn, its empty carriages swaying gently. The carousel horses, their once vibrant colours now chipped and faded, stared blankly ahead. The funhouse loomed before us, its distorted mirrors reflecting our images in grotesque ways. As we explored deeper, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere, a feeling that we were not entirely alone. A game booth had a single tarnished prize still sitting on a shelf. Footprints, not our own, marked the dusty floor of the funhouse. A sense of disquiet began to settle upon us. Night descended quickly, the darkness swallowing the carnival in an inky blackness. We had intended to camp nearby, but a growing sense of dread made us reconsider. We started to make our way back towards the edge of the woods. Then we them. Figures emerging from the darkness, their forms grotesque and distorted. Former performers, their bodies bearing the scars of a long-ago tragedy, a fire that had claimed the carnival years ago. Their skin was scarred and stretched. Their eyes burned with a vengeful light. The clowns, their painted smiles now twisted into horrific grimaces, shuffled towards us, their laughter replaced by silent, rasping breaths. The ringmaster, his once flamboyant attire now tattered and burnt, gestured with a skeletal hand, his eyes promising a gruesome spectacle. The hunt began. We scattered, our initial bravado replaced by a primal fear. The rusting rides became our obstacles. The funhouse mazes our desperate hiding places. The disfigured performers pursued us relentlessly, their silent forms appearing and disappearing in the darkness. We scrambled through the funhouse, the distorted mirrors reflecting our terrified faces as the clowns' silent figures lurked around corners. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and the only sounds were our ragged breathing and the scraping of the performers' feet on the wooden floors. Outside, the ringmaster stalked through the grounds, his burnt form a menacing silhouette against the faint moonlight. He seemed to anticipate our every move, appearing at the end of darkened pathways and behind rusted ride carriages. We tried to reach the edge of the woods, our escape route feeling miles away. The performers seemed to multiply, their disfigured faces appearing in the shadows, their silent pursuit relentless. One of us stumbled and fell near the carousel. Before anyone could help, the clowns descended, their scarred hands reaching out. We could only watch in horror as the figure was dragged away into the darkness, disappearing amongst the faded carousel horses. The remaining members of our group pressed on, our desperation growing with each passing moment. The carnival, once a place of joy and laughter, had become a terrifying labyrinth of rusting metal and vengeful spirits. We reached the main gate, the rusted metal creaking ominously as we tried to force it open. It was jammed shut, unyielding to our frantic efforts. The ringmaster appeared behind us, his burnt eyes gleaming in the darkness, his skeletal hand gesturing towards the depths of the carnival. From the shadows more figures emerged, their disfigured forms surrounding us. There was no escape. The long-forgotten performers had claimed their new attractions. The carnival awaited its next show. The dare had been issued with the bravado only teenage boredom and a thirst for the macabre could conjure. The old Blackwood house, where a retired circus clown had supposedly lived out his days in solitude before his demise, stood silent and decaying at the edge of town, a perfect target for our reckless curiosity. The overgrown yard and the peeling paint of the house already exuded an air of neglect and abandonment. A broken window on the ground floor offered an easy point of entry. We slipped inside, the darkness within swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. The interior was just as dilapidated as the exterior. Dust lay thick on every surface and the air carried a musty, stale odour. In what must have been the living room, tattered remnants of furniture sat draped in cobwebs. But it was the details that sent a shiver down our spines. Upstairs, in a room that seemed to have been the clown's dressing room, makeup-stained mirrors lined the walls, their surfaces clouded with age and grime. Torn and faded clown costumes lay scattered across the floor, their once vibrant colours now muted and ghostly. And then there were the shoes. Dozens of them lined up neatly against one wall, empty clown shoes of all shapes and sizes, their silent presence strangely unsettling. We moved through the house, each room revealing more unsettling remnants of the clown's solitary existence. A half-finished painting of a grotesque, smiling face sat on an easel in one corner. In another room, a collection of worn-out joke books lay open, their pages filled with faded ink. As we explored, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere, a feeling that we were no longer alone in the house. A draft of cold air swept through a room with no open windows. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a soft shuffling, echoed from the floor above. One of us, Sarah, stopped abruptly in the hallway, her gaze fixed on a mirror at the end of the corridor. Its surface was heavily stained with makeup, but as she stared, her eyes widened in a silent horror. She pointed a trembling finger at the reflection. In the murky depths of the mirror, behind her own reflection and the distorted image of the hallway, was another figure, a clown. Its painted face was pale and gaunt, its smile stretched into a rictus of silent anger. Its eyes, dark and hollow, were fixed directly on Sarah's reflection. She backed away slowly, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes never leaving the mirror. The rest of us followed her gaze, our blood running cold as we too saw the ghostly image in the glass. The clown's reflection did not move, but its silent rage was almost tangible. The air in the house grew colder, the silence heavier, charged with an unseen presence. A low creaking sound emanated from the floorboards above, as if something was moving. The feeling that we'd intruded upon something ancient and angry intensified. We turned to leave, our initial bravado completely gone, replaced by a desperate need to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house. But as we reached the broken window, the only way out, a loud crash echoed from inside, as if something heavy had been knocked over upstairs. We froze, our escape route suddenly feeling like a trap. The creaking sounds above grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by a faint dragging sound. The ghostly image in the mirror downstairs remained, its silent, angry gaze fixed on our reflections. We were not alone in the Blackwood house, and the clown was not happy we had come.